So this morning, uh, Brother Dan talked about in his prayer that we could come here and be inspired. And hopefully I have some inspirational words. This is a topic that is inspiring to me. Um, and it's something that we've been covering in the first principles class um, a few weeks ago on Monday nights, and it's really that class we're just starting at the beginning, starting in Genesis, and then working our way through. And we spent a lot of time on the creation account, as you really see in the first three chapters of Genesis. You basically get the story of mankind, the story of the Bible, all condensed into one story of how everything came to existence, um, and then the problems that men and women were going to face, and the solution to that problem, which is a savior, although that's really referred to in very symbolic language, and you kind of have to have the rest of the story to be able to go back and see that given for you. And so this symbolism in creation I find really interesting because typically. Um, in the world, the thought of a creation is not popular among modern scientists. It's not totally out, but modern science would say that there's a different way that the heavens and earth were created, and then there's a different way that all the creatures were created, right? So we've the heavens and earth, stemming from a big bang of some sort. I mean, which realistically could still have been the way that God chose to enact the way he created things. The story of creation in Genesis, doesn't necessarily pick up, um, um, at the very beginning of God. We don't know what that means because if God is all existing and time means nothing, the concept of a beginning is difficult to wrap our minds around for God or for the earth. So when we say in Genesis 1:1, so all morning long, we're going to be in Genesis 1. I think I would rather talk through it this morning, and maybe at some time I'll pull together PowerPoint slides, but I'd rather talk it and then read it out of our Bibles, because some of the words I'm going to use, to try to capture the essence of what um, this ancient Hebrew meant and what it would have meant when it was written by the authors are a little bit different than the way it comes off in a King James version, which was many, many, thousands of years later, and then has since the language has evolved for us as well. So we're going to talk about symbolism, and the I used a number of resources here, but really the main resources was the Bible Project video on Genesis 1. I really liked the way they did this, and I can send out later this afternoon an email that links you to that. We're going to walk through that video. I found it very deep, actually. So you watch it quickly, and it's useful to go back. And basically, what we're going to do is go back and dig into a number of the things that they said in it. Okay, so um, Genesis 1. Let's read the first verse. Actually, yeah, we'll just do it verse by verse. I'm going to read the first verse in the King James, and then I'll read it translated a bit. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the translation here, or a different way of thinking about this, would be in the beginning, God created the skies above and the land. The the Hebrew words for this, the heaven really meant the skies above, so it's more like a place, and the earth, they didn't have a concept of the globe, the planet Earth, right? They had a concept of the land, the place that they were standing. Verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Um, okay, so here, what we could read this as is the land was wild and waste, or it was unordered and uninhabited. There was nothing. So, and that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then in verse 3, we start getting into the actual creation. So we've got a separation of skies and land talked about, and then um, we've got the water talked about, or darkness was on the face of the deep abyss, which is referring to a dark and chaotic ocean, and the Spirit of God was over the face of this dark and chaotic ocean. Okay, so in just as some rules in your reading, and you'll see it in the Bible, but each day starts with "and God said," um, and then each day ends with "and there was evening and morning," or um, let's see, and the evening and the morning were the second day, right? So, um, but that's the way each day starts and ends, and that's the way we'll walk through it. So, 6 days of creation. And each day is really addressing the problems described in verse 2. And those problems are there's no order, there's no inhabitants, so it's a chaotic place, there's nothing living, and there's no light. And actually, in the Bible Project video, they don't talk about the light here. I mean, they talk about it, but they don't talk about it as a problem that's created in verse 2 that then God is going to go solve. But I think that's probably the most important problem that the earth has, that God solves with creation. Um, and we can see this in verse 3, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The very first thing created is light, right? So that is the first problem he solves. So what is the problems in verse 2 again? We read the earth was without form and void, right? So it was had no order. It was chaotic. Darkness was upon the face of the waters, or upon the face of it, right? Um, and this um, and yeah, so and it had no inhabitants, and that comes in. Um, yeah, that comes in the void. It was empty. It was without form. It's chaotic. It was void. It's empty, and there's darkness. So three problems that God is going to attempt to solve. And just again, as a way to think about this, as a framework for our mind, in days 1 through 3, God changes this unordered darkness into three ordered realms. And then in days 4 through 6, God fills this uninhabited wasteland with living things. So that's how he solves those problems. Now, before he solves any of that, as we read in verse 3, he creates light. So why is this so important? Let there be light, and there was light. Well, this is God's glorious light. It's filling and containing the darkness and separating the day from the night. So God's also establishing the order of time, that things are going to progress with this. And he's creating these realms of light and darkness, or days and night. But to start with the creation, to begin with, the world has to be filled with God's light. Day 2, this comes in verses 6 through 8. And we read that here in the King James's, and God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters," which the way they translate it in the Bible Project is, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." Um, so interesting, like you've got, we remember that God was over the face of the deep, or over the face of the waters, and they're separate. We have this concept of separating water from water, right? So, and essentially what this means is you're separating the waters of the ocean from the waters that are in the sky. Again, ancient cultures, they perceived the sky as this big water dome, essentially, that was keeping back the water that would rain on them periodically. And if we think about the language, I was thinking about actually the talk that Tanner gave a while back on the flood. And if you think about the language used in the flood, like God opens up the sky, right? So they're thinking about this as he's peeling back, or opening up, or creating a rift in this protective dome that he has against the water raining down. Now, it's interesting as That's not the way it actually works, right? We know this evaporative cycle happens and that sort of thing. The water is recycled and cleansed and purified. But there is a dome, there is a vault, right, between the earth, which is a place that is habitable and good for all life, and space, and has light, we should say has light, and space, which is infinite darkness and chaos and is completely uninhabitable for life. And so there is a vault. We call that the atmosphere. We'll get that. We'll get into that in a little bit later. Okay, so he's separating the waters from the waters, and he's splitting these chaos waters in half, above and below, creating the realms of the skies and the seas. All right, skies up, up where God dwells, which is calm and peaceful and beautiful, right? And the seas, which can roil. At least that's some of the symbolic language that we would think about. Okay, day 3, verses 9 through 13 here. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. Okay, so let the waters under the skies be gathered into one place, and let the dry ground appear. Pretty similar to the way this reads in the King James Version. And here God is creating the realm of land. He's separating out the land from the seas. So he's separated the heaven from the sea, and now he separates the sea from the land. Right? So we've had two things kind of pulled apart or come out of this chaotic, roiling sea. But he's not done on on day uh, on day 3 here, because he's got a bonus creation coming. Um, and God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And again, we have this, he describes everything as good at the end of these days too. So we've got plants and fruit trees and seeds, for them to reproduce and propagate and cover the earth. All right, so days 4 through 6. Now we've created the water, the earth, the sky, and then plants on the earth. Now we're going to get into some more detailed creation. Verse 14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth." So God says, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky." So he's created this vault that separates us. And essentially, he's installing these lights, sun, moon, and stars, as signs and symbols that reflect his own light. So, and essentially gives them his own power to separate day and night. So the lights in the sky, and there's, the way we're going to order this study, I'll give, I think it'll become multiple talks here, is that we're going to start very high level about the creation and things God set up, and then we can go into some more detail about, for instance, the concept of light and the symbolism across the scriptures. But here we're seeing that on day 4 he's installing these lights, sun, moon, and stars. They're reflecting his own light. Again, on day 1, the very first creation is he had to take the darkness and put his holy light into this earth in order to establish any of the rest of the good things that he was going to do. Now we get into day 4, and he's giving a little bit more order. He's taking, his light and delegating that light to sun, moon, and stars. Also, very interestingly, if we think about the 7,000-year plan that the 7 days of creation represents, this is day 4, the 4,000th millennium. The 4,000th millennium was also when Jesus came to this earth as the sun, or God's reflection of light, coming to this earth. So lots of places that we can go with symbolism here. Day 5, verses 20 to 23. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and the fowl that may fly above the earth, and the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. Okay, so day 5, let the waters swarm with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the land. So he's creating both the creatures that live in the waters below and that fly near the waters above, if we use this concept of the firmament, or the vault of the separation of water in the skies and in the waters on earth. Okay, and then day 6, verses 24 through 31. And God said, let the earth bring forth. Again, when we read this word earth, this is the land. Let the land bring forth the living creatures after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and every living thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. All right, so day 6, let the land produce living creatures. And these living creatures emerged up out of the ground to live on the land, right? And he then we're going to continue because he has a bonus act of creation on day 3. It's kind of like the separation of the land from the water. Sorry, this is day 6. The separation of the land from the water on day 3. He had a bonus act, which was creating living plants that would have seed and multiply and fill the earth. Now he's having a bonus action when he creates the animals, and that bonus action is man. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. I'm in verse 26. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he them, created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat, or for food. And every beast of the earth, and every fowl of the air, and every thing that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. So he gives dominion to man. And by the way, the Hebrew word, which I didn't know for this, for man is Adam. So Adam is literally just named man, which I think I knew at some point in my life, but it reminded me when I saw this. That was pretty interesting. And he provided all the plants that he created in day 3 for man and for all the beasts and creatures as food. Okay, so summary. In God's creation, for each of the first 6 days, when he creates it, he says it's good. Actually, I should say each of the first 5 days. But after making humans, God says that it is very good. So, humanity is the most special creation that he makes here. He floods the earth with life. That's the most important, with light. That's the most important part of creation. But um, the most special creation is man. And he has a little poem here. I think it's the first poem in the Bible, which is verse 27, right? Which is, so God created humanity in his own image. In the image of God created he them, male and female, he created them. That's a different translation than the King James, but fairly similar. And these male and females, they came up from the ground, these humans, like the other creatures, but they were made in God's own image, and they were put on earth together to embody and to represent the Creator within His creation. And He blesses them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it over all the creatures, and reminds them that they have all the plants and the fruit of the tree for food to eat. So God is turning His creation over to mankind to run. He's created something that's in His own image, giving them special powers, and then turning the creation over to us and basically saying like, hey, I want you to run this. And as we get into later in the creation in chapter 2, he gives Adam jobs in his garden, right? And Adam and Eve both jobs in his garden, and gives them commandments, some rules. Okay, so we're not going to get there this morning. After 6 days, though, we have a concluding line, which draws us back to the key words of the opening line, which says, "And so were completed the skies and the land and all their inhabitants." Um, all right, so that's very similar to referring us back to in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. He's getting into this creation. But then he adds one more day. It's almost like we've got bonus creations on days 3 and 6, and then we have an extra day that's added. Um, and so, and this reads in the first 3 verses of Genesis 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. So God created and completed the seventh day the work which he had done, and rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and set it apart as holy. So after ordering, the the cosmos or the universe, and specifically this little part of the universe, which is so special, that is the only one like it that we know. God comes to rest and to dwell in a sacred place. Um, Basically, like the earth the whole earth is his holy temple where God lives with his people. And we also notice that on the seventh day, we don't get the phrase, and the evening and the morning were the seventh day, and there were evening and morning. It doesn't appear, because that's meant, I believe, to symbolize the seventh day has no end. It describes God's ideal vision for the whole earth, where God lives with his partners to rule the world in harmony. And this is symbolic, of course, of the kingdom. And as we start to think about the you know again, that 7,000-year plan, that each day of creation represents 1,000 years of humans on earth. The seventh day is the goal of creation. It's God's kingdom. It's God coming to rest on earth with his people. And so we have also just the symbolism here quickly on the number 7 and how important it is of creation. There's 7 announcements that creation is good. There's 7 words in Genesis 1 and verse 1, 7 Hebrew words. There's 14 words, so 2 times 7 in the second verse. And then the first 3 verses of Genesis 2 are 3 lines of 7 words to talk about his how he rests, and that final day of creation, which really is a day of rest. So Genesis 1 and the first 3 verses of Genesis 2 are designed to show us that God's purpose is to share creation with those he creates in his own image, so that they can rest and rule it with him forever. Now, spoiler alert, right? Things go wrong, okay? He creates things very good, but then there's temptation. There's the temptation or the lust of the eyes overwhelming the man and the woman, and them eating of the fruit, them breaking the one commandment that they had, right? And then there's a separation from this garden that he's put them in, where the plants are growing perfectly and creating food and everything's eating. And then what is there? There's an opportunity for us to recreate ourselves in God's own image, right? And he gives us an example. He gives us his son as his own image on this earth to say, this is what a human version of the divine principles looks like. This is what being tempted fully as a human and overcoming it and living a life without sin looks like. So he gives us that example as well on earth, of this creation. So we now have the job to recreate ourselves in his own image. It was always his idea that, he turns this creation over to us. He gives us a little bit of responsibility, and it's like with kids, you're turning things over more and more to your kids, giving them a little bit more responsibility. Some of the young people in this room, I mean, before too long, we'll be turning over car keys to them, which ain't nobody wants to think about that, right? But there's a lot of responsibility that comes when you grow up, and what happens? We make mistakes. We we have as we get more responsibility, as we have more freedom, we push the limits and the boundaries, and we make mistakes, and then we have to figure it out. That's the process of life. That's the process of childhood, and that's the process of our life as God's children on this earth, to work through that and to try to ultimately recreate ourselves in God's own image. Okay, so like I said before, we're going to organize this study. As we look at symbolism and creation. And I find this, I'll just say again, I find it really interesting for a couple of reasons, because it's nice to see the order and the plan of God laid out so early, and it gives me faith in a fairly faithless world, that there's something special here about this Bible that we have, that it's not just an old book, right? Which most of the world would believe that it is. Um, and it also sets an understanding, or a framework for understanding God's plan and purpose across the rest of the Bible. And and I find that useful, because then when we see something that we find that's difficult, that seems outside of that framework, or if we see something that we just don't understand, then the better we have a framework built, and we say, well, wait a minute. We have a pretty solid framework that God gave us for how to order things and how things should fit. So we need to pull that back in. We need to pull it back into God's framework. How could this make sense to pull it back into God's framework? So that helps me as well. Okay, so high level, and then we're going to cover this morning a little bit more symbolism on days 1 through 3, which is again the process of ordering the world. Um, okay, so the creation. All right, let me dive into day. Well, let me just say, I referred to something without referencing it, actually. Um, so I want to do that. So the day for 1,000 year principle, because that could be a new concept to some folks, and it's not something that everybody believes in. There is some biblical verses for this. There's a lot in Revelation. There's also Psalm 90 and verse 4. That's probably the main verse that's used here, but it reads, "For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night." So 1,000 years are as a single day. Um, and let's see. There's a number of verses as well in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 7. And then really kind of throughout the rest of Revelation 20, verse 11, 12, 13, 14. There's a number of verses that establish this. And really throughout Revelation, as we look at, um, 7 it being a very important symbol, uh, this is also described, and it helps us fit Revelation with creation. Also, kind of interesting. It's like God opens and closes and mirrors things, right? So we've got a very tangible creation of the world with a lot of symbolism built into it in the very first couple chapters of the Bible, and then the very last book of the Bible is in-depth symbolism that is talking about how we're going to recreate and solve these problems, or how God's going to recreate this very good world, very good state that he had originally created and solve the problems that have come from man. Okay, so before we get into that, let's just nerd out a little bit because this is something I find kind of fun. So we talked about the realms. God was setting up these three realms in the first 3 days of creation: light and darkness, number one, which gives the order of time or day and night, um, skies and seas and land in days two and three. And so the light and the darkness, so those are the realms, right? Light, sky and sea, or the waters being separated, and then the land. Um, Again, just to reiterate, the light comes as the first precursor to all else. The sky and sea, when we think about this, down here at sea level, we are protected. We have life. We have God's light with us. When we get into the atmosphere, the skies, that's the boundary that separates and protects us from radiation, that keeps oxygen and other gases on this planet. And then space, again, we have this lifeless, dark place. So God's created a special place for life and for his light to dwell. And remember, his entire plan was to have his light be fully here to dwell fully with us. And then land, where we live. And we live in four dimensions, right? We live in the X, Y, and Z direction. So, kind of forward, sideways, up, and then time. And so we have through this, you know, all have order. He took chaos, he gave all order, i.e., he governed things with what we would call physics now and created a governance for um, all of our existence. Okay, then he created life and put a whole separate group of laws around life, but we're not going to talk about that today. Day one, light. Again, this is God's glorious light that fills and contains the darkness as he separates day from night. Um, uh, God is setting up the foundation for all of life, for all of purpose, and for all of existence. This is the cornerstone of life. For it to be in place is God's light, and for us to have to be recreated in God's own image, as He is planned for us, we have to accept and embrace the light of God and reject the darkness of the world. Day two, water. Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. Um, God split the chaos waters in half, left most of the chaos on the earth below, and he creates the realms of the sky above, or he creates the heaven above. And we know that throughout the Bible, the sea represents mankind. And here it's portrayed as the chaotic abyss. So that's the world in which we live in. That's the people and the nations in which we're surrounded. And we're looking to separate ourselves as the heavenly, as God, as we know that Jesus is up on God's right hand. Day three, the land. God gathers the waters under the skies and lets the dry ground appear. God's establishing this realm of land which emerges out of the chaotic water, and he's inviting plants and fruit trees with seed to emerge out of this land. So, okay, now we can see what does land represent in the Bible? What's promises, a righteous seed, inheritance, provision for his people. And we see this bonus creation of the plants on the land, and he talks about creating fruit and creating seed, right off the very bat. Because I want to read the Google AI overview of, I think the question I ask is, what does the land symbolize in the Bible? And I like this because, and I did another one and it goes into a lot more detail and is probably, even better than this, but it's a little longer. But I liked this because of how much it emphasizes the land on earth. So here we go. In the Bible, the land symbolizes divine promise, covenant, inheritance, blessing, and the tangible fulfillment of God's faithfulness to his people. The promised land represents not just a physical territory, but also spiritual rest, a place of God's presence, and ultimately points to the eternal new heavens and new earth described in Revelation. The land also functions as a metaphor for a nation's spiritual state and a thermometer of covenantal faithfulness. Okay, that last part I thought was pretty interesting that they captured, like, how is the land doing? But that's a separate thought. The basic thought I wanted you to think about here is this: the promised land representing the physical territory and spiritual rest, and pointing towards eternal heavens and a new earth. Right. And all of this is talking about land. It's talking about tangible land. So the belief that God will have a kingdom on earth, because that's a pretty different belief than most religions have, I mean, really is pretty well, even when you just look at an AI overview of what the Bible symbolizes, it comes out, it kind of hits you in the face that how important the land is, and it's the tangible and the spiritual. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Um, okay. We also get this concept of being pulled out of the chaotic waters, right? The promised land, the promised seed, the fruit, um, the works that we do, um, Jesus, all of these things are symbolized in the land. And again, being pulled out and separated from the craziness of the world. Um, okay. So to close here and to move into the memorial service, we're going to think just a little bit about the light, and we'll dive into the light as a representation of symbolism in more detail later. But um, as we turn our minds to the blessing that we have of this life, the blessing that we have of this hope, we want to think about the one man who made it possible, who is symbolized again in the sun being created on the fourth day of creation, who was this light to the world that came. And we'll read some language that Jesus used early in his ministry with Nicodemus in John 3 and verse 19 through 21. And this is the condemnation: that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. So Jesus calls us to be drawn to the light. If we go back a few chapters to John 1 and read verses 1 through 5, God gives us some more language that helps us think about what this divine light is. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not, or couldn't apprehend it. So the light is more powerful. The light is the opportunity. It is as we read here, the light of men. Life and light are completely attached here. Jesus came back to this earth to as God's son to offer himself to create an opportunity for all of us to retrieve this light of God, this perfect light of God, which gives us the opportunity again of eternal life, as perfect life is matched with perfect light. And we know that the light that we have shine is the works that we do. It's the way we treat each other. It's the way we show up every day. It's the way we devote ourselves to understanding God, to understanding His Word, to understanding His Son, and trying again to recreate our image in the image or likeness of Christ. And that's the opportunity we have, the opportunity made for us by the sacrifice of Christ.